Here's a sentence that shouldn't exist. A town built entirely by Chinese immigrants for Chinese immigrants on land those same immigrants were legally forbidden to own, not discouraged, forbidden by statute. And they built it anyway. 50 buildings, a school, a theater, 5 gambling halls on a 9-acre handshake with a white rancher named George Locke. A lease that didn't get settled into anything resembling ownership for 89 years. 89 years of paying rent on your own front porch. That's not a footnote. That's the whole story. And then we haven't even gotten to the fire yet. This is Drive-Thru Towns. I'm your host, Andrew Wilcox. Maybe you've driven past it. State Road 160, south of Sacramento. A levee road with the river on one side and pear orchards on the other. Blink and it's gone. A strip of wood-frame buildings leaning into each other like old men at a bar. A faded sign. Maybe a motorcycle parked outside something called the Wops. 70 miles an hour renders it quaint, a curiosity, a kind of place you'd mention at a dinner party. Oh, we drove through this little ghost town in California, and wasn't that adorable? In a state full of ghost towns that are adorable. And then you never think about it again. That's the crime of a drive-through town sometimes. It hands you the outside and lets you assume that's all there is. But let's rewind to October 7th, 1915. Walnut Grove, 1 mile south. It's Chinatown. 80 buildings packed into 3 blocks, goes up in flames. An accident, they said. Fire doesn't ask who built the levees it's now curling around. And in the ash, a fracture. 2 dialect groups had been living side by side in that Chinatown. Taishanese speakers and Cantonese speakers from the Zhongshan district. And after the fire, they split. One group stayed and rebuilt. The other walked north, onto swampland, reclaimed decades earlier by Chinese laborers working waist-deep in malarial water for less than $1 a day, and said, we'll build our own town, on our own terms. Except there were no terms, not legal ones. The California Alien Land Law of 1913 said Chinese immigrants couldn't own farmland. So a merchant named Li Bing negotiated a lease instead. Verbal, informal, with a man whose name would end up on the map. Not Li Bing's name, Locke's. Fast forward 5 years. The place has a nickname now, California's Monte Carlo. Population 600. 1,500 on a harvest weekend, swelling and shrinking like a lung. 5 gambling houses, running Fantan, behind blacked-out windows. 5 brothels, opium dens tucked next to the Chinese language school like Sin and Scholarship shared a landlord, which technically they did. There's a building still standing called the Dai Loi Gambling House, a museum now. And if you climb to the second floor, there's a hole cut in the floor. That's not decorative. That's where a lookout crouched, watching the room below for the sheriff, ready to whistle down a warning before the cards even hit the felt. And then there's Al Adami, Italian, not Chinese, the only outsider ever let fully into the town's commercial bloodstream. He bought the bar in '34 and ran it like a fever dream. He'd cut your necktie off with scissors if you showed up dressed too nice for his taste. He'd hurl loose change at the ceiling just to hear it stick. He'd stir a lady's cocktail with his own finger and call it service. He died in 1961. The bar still called the Wops. Nobody gotten around to changing that. And honestly, at this point, changing it might do more damage than keeping it. Here's the machine gun part. Fire, then flight, then a lease, then vice, then decline. The Depression hit. Mechanization hit harder. and don't need 600 field hands once a machine can do the asparagus picking. The kids left for Sacramento, for San Francisco, for anywhere with a college and a paycheck that didn't depend on the harvest calendar. By the 50s, the Chinese population could count on your hand. The town kept standing mostly because nobody could agree on what to do with it. Sold it to a Hong Kong developer in 77. Sold again to a housing agency in 2002. And only then, only in 2004, could the residents actually buy the ground under the houses their grandparents built with lumber they salvaged from a fire they didn't start. 90 years of renting your own address. And here's the part that turns this from a curiosity into a gut punch. As of right now, Locke has about 70 residents. 3 of them are Chinese American. 3. The last rural Chinese town in the United States. The only town in the country built entirely by Chinese hands for Chinese lives is now populated almost exclusively by people with no ancestral claim to the thing they're living inside of. That's not tragedy in the Hollywood sense. Nobody's villain here. It's just a slow arithmetic of assimilation, opportunity, and time. The same math that hollows out mill towns and mining camps and steel cities everywhere in the country. We build monuments to exclusion, and then exclusion succeeds so well that the excluded leave. And what's left is a museum with the light still on. It's the American story running in miniature. Build something out of spite and necessity. Watch the next generation outgrow it and argue for a century afterward about who gets to keep the key. In 2016, that argument went to court. 5 years of litigation over whether a non-Chinese buyer could purchase one of the historic buildings. The community fought it and won, which tells you something. That even with 3 residents left who share the bloodline of the founders, somebody in Locke is still standing at the door, still deciding who gets in, the way George Locke once decided who got to lease his swamp. The buildings are still wood, same material that burned down the town they fled in the first place. Nobody's replaced it, not out of nostalgia, but because that's just what you build with when you're starting over on borrowed ground. Drive past it, and it looks like nothing happened here, but something did. Something always does. In the places we've agreed to stop looking at. Somewhere behind that levee, a door that hasn't opened in decades is still, technically, locked. This has been Drive-Thru Towns. I'm your host, Andrew Wilcox. A special thanks to Chloe Jones for providing our music. If you enjoyed this journey, please follow the podcast to stay updated on all our upcoming episodes. To keep the conversation, you can connect with me on Instagram at 50 State Family. Find me on LinkedIn under Wilcox Legal, or reach out directly via email at wilcoxlegal@gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next road.
'Cause I was wandering free on an American dream with a million things to see and do. But it's all good, I'm fine. Had the time of my life, 'cause I did it all.